You might want to mute the microphone at your end. Yeah, thanks. Okay, we're in. All right, so let's see. Question about social recon before we move on. All right, so here's the basic idea. I'm not military, but I often adopt a military point of view, mostly because what the military does, and organizations like the military, like cops, they're into risk assessment. They want to know the top dangers like first. Boom, 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 boom. Right? And so that point of view is useful to adopt whether you believe that there's danger or not. So what they'll do is they'll cover all their bases, all their contingencies. So when you're going into an area where there's enemy forces arrayed all around you, you have to look at where the disposition of the enemy forces are, where they are, what they're doing, and their relationship with the people, okay? This technique was basically created out of public health, which basically says, okay, there's three things that you need to look at. You need to look at the host, that is the potential target for a problem. You need to look at the environment. And you need to look at the agent. Okay, so like if this is mosquito, like malaria, then the agent is the mosquito that bites the human, and the environment's the swamp. So depending on what you want to do, you could drain the swamp, spray the swamp, employ bats to eat the mosquitoes, or drain the swamp, or you can inoculate the host. And it's basically disease prevention. Okay, so a social recon is basically, okay, addictive behaviors take place in an environment. And part of that environment is the policy, like what we decide to allow. Okay, so when I was talking about, for example, last week when we were talking about, what it takes to be legally drunk, and how can the city prosecutor get busted for drunk driving? Doesn't he know what drunk driving is? No, apparently not.
He got fired, though.
Yeah, he got fired, right? And it's actually really easy to avoid legally drunk if you know what legally drunk is and you stay below legally drunk. But the policy environment basically promotes ignorance of what legally drunk is. Because then people think legally drunk is, if I feel sloshed, if I slur my speech. That's why I went off on this whole soapbox last week, which there's some parts I left out. When I was presenting this to faculty council, the current policy that's in COPS, you can download it or look at it, and I said, look, I'm a treatment person. You don't use at all, period. If you're a 12-stepper. I'm not in recovery, but that's the rule in treatment. In K-12, you got kids in school, nobody in that school environment can use and come to work, period. But the rules covering higher education are the same rules as Congress. So people were coming to work drunk. I wish I was making that up. Right? And the federal policy that was covering it basically said, okay, you shall not use street drugs, right? You don't want your teachers stoned, or baked, or frying, or wired. Right? Not yes. Right? And thou shalt not abuse alcohol. But the federal policy did not say thou shalt not exceed legally drunk. Didn't say that. Abuse alcohol. Now, there's a strict medical definition and there's a legal definition. Neither one were in the federal policy.
So they deliberately omitted
Since it's higher education that's writing the policy for Congress, somebody did. Somebody omitted that. That's a policy piece. That's an environmental piece. Okay? So when I gave you that alcohol chart, it is illegal for me or the Prevention Coalition to put that on a bottle in either Eugene or the state of Oregon. Illegal. Federal law.
Even if it was your own company?
Illegal. Yeah, even if it's your own company.
If you owned your own store, could you?
What part of illegal?
Well, it wouldn't be on the, no, it wouldn't be on the bottle, but it would.
No, it's preempted. Okay, it's preempted, meaning it's the Fed that decide what the labeling is, period. It takes an act of Congress, and guess who Congress is in the pocket of? Okay, I'm just saying, golden rule. Them that got the gold makes the rules, all right? So what I'm trying to teach you is, look, your attitudes have been shaped. You think it's accidental, but no, you walk up to a 7-Eleven, there's advertising there. Okay, you walk into a store, there's shelf space. That's not artificial. They paid for that. Those little promotions, like when did Elvira become the official mascot of Halloween? Well, when Coors paid buku bucks to associate a children's holiday with beer. I'm just saying, okay? Those are all policy decisions that reflect an environment that affect the attitude of the host. So social recon basically, pick your area that you want to look at. 7-Eleven is easy. Dairy Mart's easy. Frat or sorority party, that's a little harder. Talking to a homeless person about how they got homeless. All this stuff has been done. Gambling, I had a person who actually was a bartender. You may not know this, but it kind of makes intuitive sense if you like to gamble. The machines are designed to take your money. You know that, right? And if the machine starts paying out randomly, they actually adjust the computer program so it pays out less. Okay? So understand, it's designed to be a cash cow. It's designed to take your money. That's why I said last week, don't gamble with money you ain't got to throw away. A movie would be a better investment, or actually a savings account would be a better investment. But these are little hidden things that you don't know because you think that the environment is neutral and friendly to you, and I'm telling you, the environment is designed to string you out. It just is. And it doesn't matter whether it's a legal drug or an illegal drug. Illegal drugs do the same thing without advertising. Word of mouth. There's brand loyalty, there's repeat business, run on the same principles. Economy is economy. All right, well, actually talk about that because I actually pre-recorded Thursday because I'm not going to be here, but show up anyway because I pre-recorded the class, so to be continued. So social recon basically works like this. 1 to 2 pages, 12-point font. Go out in society, record what you see. So, for example, alcohol, tobacco, marketed using the 4 Ps, product, place, price, promotion. So what you might want to do, and after 15 years of sending different classes out there, some stores are pretty hip to this, so kind of you're not doing anything illegal by writing down this stuff, but people might ask you just say it's a class project. Oh, that Harris guy, huh? That dreadlock guy? Yeah, whatever. So look at the price of water versus beer. Look at what are the impulse buy things, in the checkout line. Gum, Cosmo, whatever it is, right? Because all those things are targeted to particular demographics of people. And until it's pointed out to you, you don't, I mean, that's the idea. I want you to become conscious of this. It's a skill that you wouldn't have thought about before this class. Actually, most people say, I never thought about that until, I took a marketing class, but who would ever have thought that? Well, I'm a suspicious paranoid drug counselor, and I don't want you being strung out, so I'm going out of my way to say that stuff. Sorry. Not really, but. Okay, so social recon of a 7-Eleven or Dairy Mart. You can see how the 4 Ps work in a restaurant, bar, festival, frat or sorority party. See how someone is panhandling, got where they are. People have done needle exchange stuff. Pick one. Doesn't matter. Clear? Okay. Where were we? Okay. Day 2. Day 1, week 2. Okay. All right. So I want you to be able to assess your personal level of addiction. Not in a clinical sense, though we could do that, but your personal level of addiction. So if you think of addiction as a level of activity beyond what is healthy and balanced. So if you start at healthy and balanced, that's just enough. Addiction requires you to do more than being healthy and balanced. Yeah. Question?
I forgot what it did say.
Okay.
What about less? Like, let's say you're supposed to be doing something, but you don't do it, or you.
Well, there's that. Procrastination, for example. That's one of mine, because you're addicted to crisis and stress. Right? That's another one, right? You like the high of, rushing, and then the letdown. That could be part of it too. Yes, go ahead.
Who decides the level of normal or whatever?
Who decides what's normal? Good question. But let's say, ideally, the one answer to that question is the scientists and the medical community. That's one.
Okay.
But sometimes they're in the pocket of people that are,
Right.
yeah?
Gotcha.
So you got to be able to interrogate them. And by interrogate, I mean, just like an interrogation, you ask uncomfortable questions. Questions that make them uncomfortable. Like, why do you think what you think?
Yeah, well, they tend to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
They tend to dance around those questions somehow. Whenever I hear it being asked to them, they sort of get around it in their own ways.
Well, sure. But as an example, the other day, and I said this, and I'm also presaging what we're going to do next week. So next week, we're going to get into neurotransmitter theory, how drugs work, right? It's a whole separate piece, right? You'll see a preview of that on Thursday because I talk about how nicotine works from a nicotine researcher's point of view about they want to know, and they're talking scientific language. I actually make a joke about it, about speak English. No, this is English. Here's what they're describing. You have to be able to decode that language. So let's take a simple question like, is pot addicting? Because I talked about that already. And I basically said anything that makes you feel good is potentially addicting. That it makes you feel good is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you repeat it beyond what is healthy, and who decides what is healthy? Okay, well, here's a simple test. Do you have to lie about it? If you feel you have to lie about it, it's probably an addictive process for you. Ouch. Is that a little too real? There it is. Right? So overdoing is definitely going beyond healthy and balanced. And you might lie about overdoing it or doing something too much or not enough, because that could be, possibility too. Okay? So for example, anorexia, an addictive process. It's self-denial of enough nourishment. Which is not the same as fasting. To develop spiritual strength through letting go of food and or drink. So for example, if you know any Muslims, during Ramadan, for a lunar month, Prophet Muhammad basically said, okay, I'm leaving you two teachers. One of them is the Quran, the other is Ramadan, which is basically during the day, you are going to pretend like you did. Okay? No food, no drink, no bad talking, not even having a bad thought about anybody during the course of a day for 28 days. And then you can break the fast at sunset and have food and drink then. So you're just fasting during the day. Okay, check that out, Christians. Try not eating or drinking from dawn to dusk and not having a bad thought, a single bad thought about anybody or speaking ill of anybody during the day, every day for 28 days. Try that. I'm just saying. I'm not a Muslim, but wow, okay. I can hardly go an hour without dissing somebody, at least in my mind. Okay, but anorexia, okay? Denial of nourishment because you think you're fat or whatever. So health is a natural balance. The 15-cent word or 10-cent word is homeostasis. Basically, balance that reinforces itself. Homeostasis. Okay? Health is also a state of connection to a larger balance. The people, for example, who invented Tai Chi and yoga systems, particularly where they're animal styles, basically were watching animals interact with their natural environment, how they would fight, white crane, tiger, monkey, or cobra pose or whatever. They're imitating animals in their natural state and trying to emulate that state in a state of balance. So, one of the things that you can look at as we have more technical language for describing this, but it's useful to remember that addiction is a purposeful, goal-oriented activity. There is a purpose to addictions. There's a goal with addictions, broadly speaking. Okay, so one purpose of an addiction is to obscure an emotional process, positive or negative. So if we think of your emotions like a river, then people can relate to, I want to cover up my feelings because they're negative, right? You can understand that. But what if you were constructed psychologically to believe that you didn't deserve good things, and every time you felt a good thing, you used to cover that up? That works too. Okay, so the purpose of an addiction is to obscure an emotional process, positive or negative. Yeah.
Is that the only thing?
No,
No, yeah.
but that's a major one. Look for that first. So emotions are like a river. You can dam a river, but the water always finds a way through, over, or under, or destroys the dam, too. Okay, dam might break. So, addiction is kind of like putting a cover over the dam and the river. Out of sight, out of mind, not feeling. So later on, we'll basically, when we're looking at particular types of addiction, whether it's substances or processes. So let's see, I'm checking for comprehension. Broadly speaking, I said there's two kinds of addictions. Do you remember what that was? You weren't here unless you were watching. So ingestive, things you take into your body. So that includes food. And process, things you do with your body and mind. Okay? On the individual neuronal level, that the individual nerve cell cannot tell the difference between a real event and an imagined event. That's why video games work. Okay? That's why people can spend 12 hours a day in World of Warcraft or, Second Life or whatever. Can't relate myself, but I've treated people who do. And, moms will ask me, well, is it addicting? Well, okay, let's look at it this way. You spending 8 to 12 hours with it, you getting paid? Yeah, I get to sell my avatar. Wait, let's do the math on that. How long did it take you to develop your super elf? Well, 3 months. 3 months working on it every day, 8 to 12 hours. So let's break that down to an hourly wage, and that's $1.50 an hour. Is that really worth it to sell your avatar for $1,500? And people actually buying that? And I'm not saying Bitcoin either. Bitcoin's an online currency, in case you didn't know that, but it's illegal, but so many things are, right? So, pills, this is a general principle. This is a Harrism. Pills are not skills. Okay? So, pills are not skills. So, emotions, feelings, emotional wounds, emotional trauma happen and have to be healed consciously and thoroughly. The pills, the original theory behind something like Valium or Super Valium, Xanax, they're anxiolytics. So, for example, I'll just write it down. Anxiolytic. That means it dissolves anxiety. Okay? It's the same drug class as booze. And as a concept that we'll learn, it's cross-tolerant with booze too. So you develop a tolerance to alcohol, you develop a tolerance to Xanax and Valium and benzodiazepines like Klonopin, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So here's what's happening from your brain's point of view. A selective part of your brain is getting drunk, which is taking the edge off the anxiety. Remember when I did progressive intoxication? The first thing to go was fear. Notice that? Okay, Valium is doing the same thing on a same section of your brain without the intoxication. Neat trick. But here's the problem. You knew there was going to be a problem, right? Okay. When I told you about, or maybe I didn't tell you about, I'm getting old, I forget these things, right? So I regularly see people who think it's normal behavior to drink a fifth of vodka a day. right? Now, for those folks, going cold turkey from that fifth of vodka could kill them from the withdrawal. Valium is physically addicting in less than 7 days of doctor-prescribed use, and it said, this is in the physician's desk reference. Okay, so here's what they prescribe this drug for, right? The working theory from the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 70s, I'm before your time, but I'm old enough to remember that. My dad's a shrink, so I grew up learning this stuff. The idea is stuff happens. People die. You change jobs. You get married. You have, you go to a new class. You start school. You have a major stressor. You get uptight. Now, if somebody dies, you're supposed to feel grief. You're supposed to feel bad, you're angry, guilt, all those things. It's rough, right? So the Valium is prescribed to get you through that rough patch, which they theorize will only be 3 to 6 weeks at the outside. And then they taper you off, and that's it. Because in the physician's desk reference, the PDR, which is like the drug Bible for docs, it says, normal stress and strain does not normally require therapy with an anxiolytic. I mean, it says that. So why are they scripting them like Skittles? Or Oxys like Skittles? Or pick your drug. Well, you're under a doctor's care. You're not technically an addict. So, I mean, when you say, well, when is it addiction? Okay, if a doctor is giving it to you and you're under their care and you take the script at the rate that it says on the bottle, you ain't an addict. You start taking more, or you start seeking beyond the script, you an addict. It's a fine line there, huh? Well, there it is. Okay, so the reason I brought the piece up about Valium is because going cold turkey from Valium can kill you. It says so in the PDR. Can develop withdrawal seizures, which means you go into a seizure and you can't breathe, and that's what kills you. And this can also be amplified if you drink on top of your dose, too. So part of the piece then, all right, pills are not skills. So if we taught people to feel their grief, to feel what they felt during the rough patch, to be able to surf through it or swim through it or keep your head above water, whatever your metaphor is that you like. I like surfing metaphors because it's about water, right? And you have to basically be able to swim. Not like in a swimming pool. That's not a bad skill to be able to swim laps, but rivers and ocean are rough. But you can survive them, right? So normal emotions and all those kind of things, even though many of us, myself included, tend to try and avoid them, they're normal, right? So these things have to be healed consciously and thoroughly. So medications block the feelings so that you can temporarily function through a crisis. That's the purpose of Valium. That's the purpose of Oxy. What opiates do, they do not stop the pain. They just put your brain in a state where you can handle the pain emotionally. You don't care. Okay, so they're not the skill of being functional in a crisis. That's what I'm saying. Pills are not skills. So rather than teach people the skills, we've relied on pills. There's no reason you can't do both. People will often ask me, I'm not anti-drug, I'm just anti-addiction. So people will say, well, what about this drug? What about that drug? Well, okay. And it's usually their favorite, and so they're kind of arguing for, well, I'm not really addicted to this. Look, What if I taught you the skill of doing for yourself what the drug did for you? Do you need the drug? Would you continue using the drug? Would the drug use be optional then? They never thought about that. Right. So because from the underground economy, if that's the type of drug you're using, it's always to use, not even using in moderation. And also brand loyalty, because they want repeat business. That's, basic capitalism. But Anheuser-Busch does it. Why wouldn't name your favorite drug dealer? All right, so you can use skills along with your pills, but pills alone won't build your self-mastery. Okay? So you have to understand, that is feel, understand, be able to think about, and overstand to know what happened to you.
That was a little confusing for me.
That's okay. I'm just quoting hip hop.
Gotcha.
But here's how it goes. Understand. I first got radicalized first period history class, April 5th, 1968. My history teacher, Mr. Wood, thank you, Mr. Wood, lifelong member of the John Birch Society and the National Rifle Association, which my parents referred to as the Negro Removal Association. April 5th, if you notice the date, the day after Martin Luther King got shot, he said he was glad that he had it coming, that he was a troublemaker. And I had an A in the class. And I'm going, wait, I thought he was advocating for, voting rights. Didn't the South sign the Constitution? You're supposed to be able to vote in your own country? Isn't that what a democracy is? So how is it illegal for black people to vote in their own country and have that be the law and him advocating for that? How does that make him a troublemaker? Well, he gave me a D in the class. So that was until later. I was just kind of upset that he said that. So then I go to homeroom and, I'm upset and I like Mrs. Castillo and I said, wow, Mr. Wood just said this, and and so she agreed with him. And those were the days of mandatory flag salutes. So I haven't said the flag salute since, because I ain't going to do it until liberty and justice for all is real. I mean, I don't care if Obama's, got a black president. Liberty and justice for all is a reality for every, I'm going to say human being, not just citizen. I'm going to follow the pre-1492 rules. If you're here, you're contributing to society, you're a citizen, period. Well, the Constitution says you born here, you're a citizen, period. End of discussion. So I was mad. Righteously mad. And so, I was a Boy Scout then, too. I firmly believe, but if that's the symbol of, if patriotism and racism are the same thing, I'm not down with that. So I started, working against, the Vietnam War and all this other kind of stuff, 60s radical stuff in middle school. How many of you have been able to vote since you were 18? I campaigned for the 18-year-old vote in 1968. Which became law in 71 when I was in middle school, so that you could vote. Because the logic was this: if we can go to die in Vietnam at 18, we should be able to vote then too, not just wait till 21. I'm thinking the drinking age should be non-negotiable. Sorry. Okay, but
Thanks for helping us vote.
okay. So all right. So. Understand. Know what your feelings are. Understand. Be able to think them through. let's be clear. I'm not anti-American. I'm for America, but you will follow the letter of the law guaranteed by the Constitution. End of discussion. And better. So I'm willing to fight to make it better. But it ain't where it should be by a long shot. Not even close. And overstand, to know what happened to you from a larger perspective than you. And be able to work for that, to work to improve things. Understand, overstand. That's what they mean by it in hip-hop, in case you pay attention to those things. Dead prez and flowetry and etc. Okay, so otherwise, if you don't go through that process of developing the skill to do introspection, you will basically self-medicate using addictive substances and processes. Because that's all that's being talked about in larger society in the service of those who make money from them. And that's a policy decision. That's hidden. It's in the environment. And you take it as normal. So I understood that I was smoking marijuana to medicate my anger. Stops working. Because you develop a tolerance for it. Right? But my politics basically determined that I basically avoided most of the nastiest drugs. So it was revolutionary to smoke weed, and because I was going to West LA living among, rich white hippie kids, to drop acid and go to Grateful Dead shows. That's revolutionary. But using cocaine, heroin, pills, drinking beer, and I was a fanatic anti-smoker. So if you whipped out a pack of Marlboros in front of me and tried to light up, I would destroy them in front of you. Well, those are killing you. This is getting you stoned. That was my logic. Faulty, but logic. Okay? Because, just like, the weed commercial, right? If two tobacco companies are trying to legalize marijuana to make marijuana cigarettes, it's either addictive or they're going to make it more addictive. Yeah. Or they'll try and find a way to beat it to be more addictive. I mean, that's real. So, part of your personal level of addiction. So, a little point of clarification around self-medication. It's not what's wrong with you, it's what happens to you. So, part of the piece is understanding and overstanding that what happened to you is part of a policy environment that partially allows you to have these experiences that are painful without giving you the skills to deal with them in advance. I mean, all kinds of experiences. So remember middle school? Remember the transition from elementary school to middle school, and then middle school to high school? Did it suck to be in your clique or be out of a clique or whatever? Back in the day it could be terrible. I remember, I was part of the radical stoner clique. Radical, we were political, and we were stoners, but we were political. So we read stuff and we went to demonstrations, and the jocks, they were all conservative, pro-military, et cetera, so we'd often get into battles with them. Now jocks are stoners with no political consciousness except getting loaded or, performance-enhancing drugs and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think our government teaches us to be drug addicts, from early on, because you see these kids now that have a lot of energy and they call it
depends on what you mean by the government.
Well,
Because, and the reason I'm saying this is I just want to refine your vision. Because when you put it on the government, it makes it seem like you got nothing to do with that, and that there's nothing that can be done about that.
no, you're right. I should have narrowed it down more.
No, I did that too. I used to do that too, and then I realized, wait, they're not controlling. I can still question this.
Yes.
And I'm old enough to remember when that wasn't the case and how it got to be the case. And it was to solve a problem. I will tell you, and I'll just tell you about enantiodromia just so you're ready for it, because it doesn't really come up. It'll come up on Thursday because I use the word. I'm throwing some big words at you. You don't mind, right? This is how you tell if it's a good dictionary. It has this word in it. Enantiodromia. It's Greek. And it means that which arises from its opposite. Okay? So I'm going to throw out a phrase next class where I say the cure for the disease is in the disease. The solution of the problem is in the problem itself. You get problems and challenges so you can develop the strength to get through them. And there's also a little piece in there about you wouldn't be facing the problem unless you had the strength to get through it. It's kind of like those problems in algebra. You have to like repeat them over and over, and they, give you word problem. I used to hate those things. Over and over until you develop a certain skill. Not to stress you out about math, I'm just saying. Right? So, this means often three things. Since you're here in real time and I'm explaining them, and I will be re-explaining them again because it bears repeating. That which arises from its opposite. So, problems generate solutions. Solutions generate new problems. The way you see the problem is the problem. I know you're going to ask me why. What do I mean by that? Go ahead.
I was thinking if you thought it was a problem, well, there it is. There's your butt. It already started yourself off on the wrong foot.
Well, okay. So first of all, the one that you brought up.
Yeah.
Do you know why we have summer break and spring break?
No.
It's because the little one-room red schoolhouse started out in agrarian America, that is farming America, where they literally had to break the kids to go bring in the crops on the family farm. So you take spring break to help your family bring in the crops. Same thing for summer. Bet you didn't know that. Okay? So, this school system in which you are sitting down listening to a lecture was designed for the farmer kids who could actually sit still and wait for stuff. Anybody hunt here? Okay, hunters go out and they look for stuff. And they're used to waiting, but it's intense. And it has their attention, right? So, you get a hunter kid in a farmer school, they're like, okay, when's the action going to happen? So is the problem that we have hyperactive kids, or we don't have hyperactive teachers enough to basically say, okay, let me teach to your learning style so that you get it? But that might be tricky to do with 35 kids. That might be easier to do with 10 or 20. Right? Because it's not the teacher that decides what class size it is. Right? That's an economic decision at a higher level of, quote, the government. But you haven't changed human nature. Right? So what if part of the skill in kindergarten is we taught you how to be able to sit still, comfortably, for long periods of time, and focus with just what you have in your body. Anybody get that training? Ah, right. Okay. So then you medicate that particular problem with an amphetamine, which what amphetamines are designed to do is focus your attention, that's one of the effects, along a narrow bandwidth, but what it also does is make you hyper. Okay, what about when heroin was in over-the-counter cough syrup? I'm not making that up. You'll find I don't have to make stuff up. So, when millions of women, sometimes PMS is putting up with men's stuff, and sometimes that's male scientists. So when women were thought to have a mental illness just by being female, called hysteria. Okay, so this is like made up by people like Freud, who was addicted to cocaine. So women are crazy. So the cure, that problem, the solution was stringing them out on heroin. The Puritans in 1600, right? Giving rum to 4-year-olds, which, if you were a parent today, you'd lose your kid. But back then, they considered it normal behavior, giving kids rum at 4 to put them to sleep. The problem was hyperactive kid, let's get them drunk. Because they felt that, the third one, the way you see the problem, they did not think that giving rum was a bad thing to a 4-year-old because they figured that alcohol was no more harmful for you than water. That was the way they saw the problem. They didn't think anything of stringing out millions of women on heroin for female problems. No, it wasn't female problems, it's you. But, so all I'm saying is, so the reason I brought this up, right? Problems generate solutions, solutions generate new problems. The way you see the problem is the problem. So when we look at, and we'll look at Thursday, basically policy decisions based on different views of addiction over the years. Right? So it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. So for example, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. In street talk, really bad stuff happened to you and you stuffed it. And you forgot about it in order to survive. And it keeps coming up for you basically to clear it up and let it go. And it often comes up in very difficult circumstances. So, point of clarification around self-medication. Basically, trauma happens to people on lots of different levels. So PTSD is when it happened to you personally. Multi-generational trauma. This came out of Indian country and also African American psychology. Because you know us black people, we're always into the history of stuff. Like, where did this start? Back at the way, way, way beginning. Multi-generational trauma, or also post-slavery stress disorder. Really bad stuff happened to your people, and you stuffed it, forgot about it in order to survive. It keeps coming up as unhealthy behavior for you to clear up and let it go. Now, even though MGT came out of Indian country with Indian psychologists who basically saying, okay, this Western model doesn't recognize that we had genocide happen to us, like within living memory of people. Just in North America alone, 60 million Native Americans got reduced to 3 million today. In the process of colonization and becoming America, and then another 40 in Central America and another 50 in South America. So yeah, my math ain't off. 150 million people, 1492, reduced to way less numbers. And so people remember that because their grandparents were part of boarding schools. People were forbidden from learning their language, they were put in prison, they were subject to alcohol, sexual abuse, etc., on their own by the government, and then replicated those same patterns. So that came out of Indian country to explain some of what's going on and how do we heal with it. Well, here's another piece. If you are Irish, Scot, Russian, German, I'm just hitting the top 4. That happened to you too. And it was erased in the process of becoming American. Here's a fact. Who's Irish? Who's Scot? Have you heard of the Highland clearances? Highland clearances. If you spoke your language, if you wore tartans, you could be killed by the English. If you tried to worship your faith, which was not Christian, you could be killed. Have you heard of the Riot Act? Okay, the Riot Act in England was, have you heard of blackmail?
Yes.
Okay, well, mail was silver money. It was money that the Irish and Scots used to pay for their land to the English landlords, because Britain means the land of cows. So your wealth was based on how much cattle you had, right? Cattle gives you leather, food, milk, cheese, all that kind of stuff. The British landlords would rustle the cattle and then force the Irish and Scots people to pay to get their cattle back with money. Blackmail. And if you protested it, if you gathered in groups of more than 3, that's a riot. If you protested or raised your voice, you could be subject to arrest. And the penalty is so the Highland clearances was basically going into Irish Scots areas, killing all the men and shipping the women and children off to slavery in the British colonies, which included America. Funny how that isn't part of American history.
Yeah.
I'd be more interested in that than what they do teach us.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just saying, this is in the Book of Conquest, in the Irish Book of Conquest, which, actually the Irish have a book of everybody that's conquered them, going back to the first African queen, who was part of, anyway, we won't even go into that. I'm just saying, that memory is why people have heavy drinking patterns, when in Ireland and Scotland it was a rule that nobody makes whiskey until everybody has bread first. Who would make a rule like that, women or men? Okay, so it was the women who controlled the drug technology, but when you decide that, oh, these women practicing this religion are witches, and you burn the witches, guess who decided to do that? What happened? Then you start giving rum to 4-year-olds. I'm just saying. Again, this is all history that I was taught by the state of Oregon to do drug prevention. Okay, so these are white folks basically saying, okay, white people need to know this history because just like you blacks and Indians know your history and understand, oh, this is why we need to do this to prevent this problem, because people are suffering and they're just accepting that, oh, well, I'm Irish, we like to drink, I'm German, we like to drink, I'm Russian, we like to drink. There's a reason why you didn't used to drink like that, and now you is. Alright? Understand, overstand. Who's normal? What is normal? Okay? So, bad stuff happened to you, and the habits are passed on multi-generationally. Alright? Came out of Indian country, but it's valid. Because, I've had Irish and Scots people point this out to me. Okay, well, how come y'all don't talk about this? Mr. Wood didn't talk about it. And he is Irish, so... Alright, so remember I said this before 1952 it was illegal for Native Americans to drink alcohol? I think I talked about this already, right? Okay. So basically, and this is kind of the reason. So, for example, if you never even had coca plants to chew the leaves in your tribe, suddenly the government issues crack and crack pipes. So being given whiskey when you never even used wine is going to have a bad effect on you, particularly even more so when you're not allowed to practice your native religion, which would keep you from drinking. Same thing actually happened to white people by other white people. So it's not about race, it's about policy and control. Doesn't matter who the government is. Okay? So if your spirituality, for example, requires you do non-drug things to stay healthy and connected, and whole and government policies forbid that practice, you're going to develop problems. So this doesn't erase personal responsibility. But part of personal responsibility is understanding that this happened to you. Because you're going to let the government decide what your history and culture is? You're going to rely on them to tell you what that is? Everything I'm telling you is basically researchable. Like I said, I don't have to make stuff up. All right, so, and I already made this point too. A country whose national, this is America, country whose national anthem is a contrafactum, that's another big word, but what it means is the song already exists, you just change the words to keep the melody. Okay? The Star Spangled Banner is the British drinking song to Anacreon in Heaven. Okay? So our national anthem's a British drinking song. Like, wait, we couldn't make up our own? We had to use one of their drinking songs? Give me a break. So even though it's repurposed, it's a contrafactum, are we a clean and sober country, or, yeah. I'm just saying. So many people have stereotypes of drunkenness, have had traumatic cultural experiences over generations, and basically I made that point already. So why addictions exist? certain forms of civilization, certain features of certain forms of civilization, require that addictions exist so that they survive. So in our world, that's individuals, institutions, corporations, industry, churches, religion, government, a few examples of the major players in addiction. I mean, that's pretty much the whole ball of wax in terms of who forms society. Okay, so you can see some reformers in some places, but overall, you can basically judge by the effect of how many people exist that have some sort of trauma and where that trauma came from. And it's not that these institutions are particularly bad, because we think of them as healing and pro-social. We trust them. Therefore, we're also not taught to question why they do the things that they do or where the things they do came from. Okay? So in this form of civilization that we're in, follow the money and the data. Okay? A budget gives you the priorities. Statistics track the things you often care about. Now, statistics, the fact that they keep statistics, they only study the things that they are focused on. Some of which are good things, some of which they're missing. Okay? But you go with the statistics because, people want proof. So follow the money and the data and follow the science to some degree. All right? So for example, in medicine, there is more money to be made treating disease in paying customers than preventing disease. And to keep you paying and sick. See how that works? All right? So whether you like ACA or Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act or not, here's what the real deal, in my opinion, should be. I'm making a distinction in terms of here's what the policy is, here's what it should be. What it should be, every American citizen, regardless of employable status, every American citizen should have the same medical coverage as Congress for free. Especially if you got enough money to go to Afghanistan. Just saying. Because covering everybody costs less than the war in Afghanistan. And the system only works if everybody is covered. So the fact that Obamacare ain't that means there's a bunch of compromises because insurance only works if everybody pays into it. I'm reaping the benefits now by paying insurance when I was young and healthy, and when I started being old and things started breaking down, I'm well insured now. I've been working solid for 45 years, paying into Social Security to pay for the people that are getting Social Security now, because I ain't gonna get it for another 5 years at least. That's how insurance works. The people who pay into it don't reap the benefits immediately unless they get sick. And everybody has to be in it. Now, that's a basic principle going back to China, where insurance came from 5,000 years ago. So part of the idea in terms of looking at policy, why addictions exist. Medicine exists to basically take care of paying customers, but where the money gets in, it starts kind of corrupting the system. So because docs don't have the ability to spend an hour with you, I mean, if you've been to a doc, you know this. My dad's a shrink, so he was trained on counseling people for 50 minutes, The state now only pays for 15. What can a shrink do in 15 minutes? How's that Prozac working out for you? Right? And he's saying that's because of the drug companies. All you can do is basically manage people's meds. That's not what I signed up to do, but that's what it is now. Not because of the medical necessity. So notice that the relationship is complex. All right? So, for example, come back. 1.5 billion, that was like 3 years ago, spent a year on ADHD drugs on kids. You know how much $1 billion is? Well, let's say if it's you. $1 billion is you spending $10,000 a day, every day for 275 years. Okay, so you're not a vampire. $10 million a day for a year. That's $1 billion. Right? So that's a chunk of change, and that is a financial incentive to keep that system in place. Okay, so of interest to me, naturally, is how many teenage and adult stimulant addicts exist. Because a significant number of adult meth addicts have voiced that belief to me. Being on Ritalin and Adderall, etc., made me feel normal, and then when I was off it or when I aged out of it, I still felt that I needed this taste, and so that's what started me on meth. Now the medical community, and this is where that kind of who's doing the defining, the medical community says, oh, well, you react differently before puberty than as an adult, that's why they do that. I'm going, wait, you're telling me tolerance isn't building up? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Science is still science. Gravity is still gravity. X amount of drug dosed in X amount of body is going to develop tolerance. Okay, so in whose interest is it to medicate children using neurotoxic pharmaceuticals rather than teach them skills of mindfulness? That's a policy decision. That is your view of the problem. I mean, this is basically just like medicating women using heroin. Motivating black slaves using cocaine. Wow, these recursive patterns. Okay, so who has a vested interest, in other words, moneyed interest in keeping you healthy? And okay, so theoretically your government and the health industry. Others who need you to continue to be a consumer, buy more stuff, or the terrorists win. So
That's kind of the stance our government's taking, though, and the media, all that.
Well, remember, the government doesn't own the media, it simply regulates parts of the media. In many ways, and the Founding Fathers kind of saw this, that, they resisted corporations being determined to be people. That didn't happen until the latter part of the 19th century. Because basically they would say, oh, well, they would start to usurp the will of the people using the power of their pocketbook. So, if certain features of certain forms of civilization require addictions exist so they survive, then other features of other forms of civilization were designed to preserve people's non-addictive, healthy relationship with themselves, their families, the community, whatever that is, the natural world. And a certain balance between all those things was observed, revealed, taught, and practiced within every feature of those civilizations. And each one of us in this room is an heir to one of those civilizations. Because if we look at what we call Western civilization is only, I'm being charitable here, 1,000 years old. And humans have been around for 200,000 years old. Sorry, I'm not a creationist. just going by the genetics and the archaeological record. Then, pieces of that collective wisdom from those days exist today, which I call that body of collected wisdom, natural mind, which is basically the state of being in which your internal inherent, that is, the potential you came in with, unlimited potential, can be developed, grow, be sustained, and expanded by conscious choice. Okay? So it's part of you, but you can be educated out of it. Okay? The original non-addictive state that every human being was born into. And even if you were born addicted, it was your mom that was addicted, not you. Okay? So your basic genetic default is towards balance. That's what your DNA code was set for. Even if you had been multi-generationally exposed to alcohol and other drugs. Copy that. Thank you. Okay? Societies existed which promoted the practices of natural mind, and they can be constructed in which to inhibit the development of natural mind, and ours is one that has been developed. Again, only over the last 1,000 years. 200 years for America. So it's relatively recent. All the stuff that we're seeing. So there's hope. Okay, so even so. So much pain and suffering. Principal skill with natural mind is self-soothing. So relying on inner resources to bring a sense of calm, order, fulfillment, and a sense of direction in times of adversity. One of these inner resources is a sense of connection and relationship to the rest of your world. So, one of my favorite cats. So Albert Einstein's a genius, right? Or was a genius. So his thing was that you cannot solve a problem from the same level of consciousness on which the problem was conceived. You have to go to a bigger level of consciousness. This following quotation is his answer to a rabbi who asked him, how do you deal with racism? So the rabbi is asking about how his daughter can cope with racism. This is Einstein's answer. A human being is part of the whole, called by us the universe, limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a prison, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons close to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from our prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all humanity and the whole of nature in its beauty. He also goes on to say, no one is able to achieve this completely, but the effort in itself is sufficient for building lasting happiness. Maybe you'll never get there, but just trying to get there and be connected is by itself worth it. So, that's part of natural mind. So, I mean, he's a genius, right? So, he's saying you're connected. So, natural mind connects you to the balanced forces of life you're already a part of. Addictive mind and addiction disconnects you from the forces of life that you are a part of, so that you begin to live out of balance. And this happens by reinforcing the illusion that you are disconnected and helpless, that there aren't solutions to your problems, or that the solutions are outside of you. That's how addiction works. So if you live out of balance long enough, it seems normal. Like I said, it was so bad, it got good to them. So within my framework that I was raised in, addiction is slavery. You know how black people feel about slavery. The Confederacy was a nation based on slavery, forcing people to be subservient, illiterate, etc., etc. So why I went there is natural mind connects you things like the Confederacy disconnect you. And America is not based on the principles of natural mind, but we as Americans can access other sources of wisdom. So I won't be here Thursday, but class will be held. It's been pre-recorded. Yes?
How do you want us to turn in our papers?
I want you to turn in your papers either by email or physically to the counseling office, or slip them under the door in my office, building 1, room 226. All right? Credit roll.
Building 1, 226.
Yeah.
Lane Online. Learn, unlearn, relearn.